In a vast wasteland of entertainment where radio has become obsolete, stands an embittered man teetering at the edge of sanity. With help from radio friends, he's about to embark on a global mission that would change the course of history as we know it. Broadcasting live from the secret studios on the banks of the Brandywine River in Delaware is Mitchell K.C. Hill. And up to the Great White North in Vancouver is Alexander Knight.
And here we are once again to bring you our finest hour of fixing stuff. This is a big monkey wrench. I'm not sure why they call them monkey wrenches, but some people call them crescent wrenches. I think, anyhow, it's just it sort of says that we're going to fix something. So perhaps we have things to fix of ourselves. This is show number 24. My name is Mitchell Hill, sometimes called Casey Hill. Back in my radio days. Wait a minute, my nose itches. Thank you. And now it's just this angry old DJ talking here. My good friend Alexander Knight, who's a not so angry DJ, but he is the keeper of the technology. How are we doing on that right now?
Doing well, thanks. It's good to be here, Mitch. And this is episode 24 of The Last Angry DJ. For those that just joined us today, we are actually restreaming, or I should say, we are streaming, and we are using Restream as a platform to broadcast this podcast to a lot more platforms. We used to stream just on YouTube, so we're now trying to broaden our horizons to go out to a lot more platforms. And our goal is we want you to be able to watch this show when you want, where you want, on whatever platform. So not just YouTube, but X, LinkedIn, Twitch, and hopefully more platforms in the future. So we appreciate your patience as we work through some of that stuff. But so far, so good. I can see all the chat messages coming in through all those platforms, so that's great. And thank you to the viewers for being here today. And it's just Mitch and I, and we're going to be talking about audio-related stuff.
When we do a two-man show, which a lot of people like, when we do it without a guest, we just don't happen to have a guest, by the way. Don't we have a name for it now? It's something Boffins?
Broadcast
give it a clever name.
Boffins.
Okay, do you
Broadcast
guys know that
Boffins.
Boffins is not a bad word? It's just a British term for technical people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love Brits. I'm a big fan. I'm an Anglophile, as they call them. Yeah, you're right. Number 24. We've lasted over 6 months here. We continue to persist in spite of all the people that think that we're wasting time. Show them that they're absolutely insane, and like and subscribe and do all that good stuff. I know you're tired of hearing people beg for all that, but literally that's the only guidepost that anybody has in this line of work to decide if your show's worth doing. But we want to thank the people that join us live on Sunday, and now we're going to be on more than one platform, which is really cool. And listen to us later as an audio-only podcast, as a podcast truly is. Podcasts aren't really video, but we're kind of inventing the new thing, video podcasts. So I guess it's just like a podcast, except your microphone is, I'm sorry, you have your microphone in front of you. So my microphone is out of the shot. I don't do the big microphone hanging over my head, so we have a little fun. But we like to talk about media-related stuff. Broadcasting certainly is at the top of our list of things to do that, and some of the pieces that make that. Last week we talked about personalities and the dangers of having an amplified personality. How does that affect you? We had Lois Nakami on the show. Thank you, Lois, for being there with us. And we'll continue to do random things that somehow touch on broadcasting-related stuff. Today I thought we'd just talk about, as usual, randomized things, but I thought it would be interesting to talk about where do you get your music? Now, it used to be, in the old days, and I'll talk about the old days, Alex will talk about the current status. It used to be that when you wanted to hear new artists, you listened to them on the jukebox at the restaurant. Yeah, there was such a thing. Or you listened to your local AM Top 40 radio, and they would play like the latest big hits, up-and-coming hits, and this and that. There was no internet. There was no way to trade that information. So you would gather your social media input based on what the DJ at the local radio station was saying. Today, it's a different story. We don't use radio typically to expose ourselves to new and upcoming artists. It's a lot of different places. Alex, why don't you talk a little bit about what you do particularly, to find out about new artists, to stay in touch with what's out there. It may just be your particular niche of what you like, but it could also be I just want to be aware of what else is out there. What do you do?
Well, what do you, as far as where I get my music from? Is that what you're?
Where do you get exposed?
Yeah.
Like you want to know about.
That's a tough one.
What's the latest pop music that's going on, or heavy metal, or classic hits? Where do you go to find that?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because, I'm going to come across as a curmudgeon. I know I'm younger than you, Mitch, but
Yes, curmudgeon.
I don't listen to a ton of new music. I have friends that just absolutely devour every new piece of music that comes out, and I just find myself repeatedly listening to and becoming over the course of time more and more. I feel like my parents, where you get stuck in your ways, and these are the artists that I listen to. And in fact, maybe there's a top 10 list of albums that you go to that you repeatedly listen to. I'm trying to be better, but I must say that I feel like I'm getting more and more out of touch with a lot of artists. I'm horrible when it comes to, because I'm from Canada, so I'm really horrible when it comes to new Canadian artists. I don't really pay much attention to that. And it was a real eye-opener to me as someone who went to broadcast school a while ago, who was very much already set in their ways that this is the music I like to listen to. And I had a stint as programmer, and you have to program that radio station with the current music. And I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, I had no idea who any of the artists were, and it was really bad. I had to do a lot of work to bring myself up to date. So I feel like I'm still struggling a little bit in that area, but it's a tough one. It's not necessarily a bad thing, I don't think. And I do discover bands that are adjacent to a lot of the genres that I like to listen to. And I think that that's fine. I mean, what do you think about that, Mitch? I mean, do you think it's a problem to be out of touch with current music these days?
Well, I am out of touch with current music. Some things sort of sneak up in your consciousness. Like I'm aware there's a Taylor Swift, and I'm aware that she has a wonderful touring, lots of people that are following, and she dates one of the Philadelphia Eagles, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm kind of tired of hearing about that. I don't really know her music, so I'm not exposed to those kinds of things because I don't go listening for it. I'm all over the place in what I like. Behind me, over on this side, I have my music library. It's about 10,000 songs based on Billboard Top 100 for the last, 50 years, going back to the 60s. And it just plays in a random order. I like the 70s, I like the 80s, but I'm rather eclectic. Maybe I'm like you. I like a little, if I'm in a mood, I'm going to listen to some old blues, some jazzy blues. Maybe jazz, maybe not hard jazz, maybe rhythmic jazz. It's got a little Latino in it. It's all over the place. Where you find your inspiration, that's what's different today because there's so many pieces of the pie that used to be divided up between your local top 40 station, Casey Kasem's American Top 40, and maybe a couple of other places that you really can't explore and be exposed to new music quite the way you can. And the other thing is, it's interesting, the content has gone very contrary to the cancel culture that we live in right now. I mean, some music, and I'm not going to go into details about what it is very misogynistic and very anti-woman. It places a very low, respect level for women. It's sort of their anyhow. I don't want to go into detail because I think it's a rabbit hole to go into. But anyhow, I don't like that kind of music. I don't like music that downplays other people. I don't like music that downplays not having a lot of money and being able to brag about it. So you're kind of getting where I'm coming from. I like music that's there for music of itself. I like a song that has a hook in it. And a hook was something that was very repeatable, very melodic, and something that kind of gets stuck in your head. Not so much anymore. It's all vocal, and they fill every little piece of the space up with somebody yodeling through songs with their lyrics. I'm not a fan of that. Back when I was growing up, when I was a kid, Sonny, There were a lot of songs that had, like if you listen Inagata Davida by Iron Butterfly, there's like a 10-minute drum solo in the middle of the song. You could never get away with that today. So music is totally different. It's a whole different world. So I'm just curious where people are finding their inspiration today. There's still a lot of fans for classic hits. That's kind of cool. I think that's neat. But it doesn't mean you have to like that. I mean, I don't listen to classical music. It's not my bag. But I think a lot of people do that. So I'm just curious where people go to find that. There is an endless number of places to go. And I'd love to hear what folks on our chat, got a bunch of people listening live here, where they go to find out inspiration for new music.
100%. Yeah, please do jump in and let us know. Mitch, my question to you is, how would you define, bring it back to radio, how would you define a quote-unquote radio-friendly song? What does that mean?
Well, a radio-friendly song is one that's not likely to upset somebody because of the content. Although what's really funny is that with today's looking back down that long continuum of 60s and 70s songs, some of those are kind of racy and wouldn't necessarily play very well in today's world. But anyhow, anything that would tend to either insult somebody or be, the FCC used to say, no drug content, no direct sexual innuendos. Of course, innuendos were always there. That was what it was all about. I mean, the term rock and roll is an innuendo, so it's kind of funny. But things have certainly changed, and back then it was a lot more scrutiny, I think, in terms of the content. They used to backtrack some of the song items. I mean, some of the Beatles used to reverse play. Everybody smoked the dope, smoked the dope. I mean, there was all kinds of weird things going on. Back in the day, somebody'd say, it's saying Paul is dead backwards. If you play the record backwards, it's just silly stuff. So back then it was a little bit different. Today, I think it's pretty much wide open. You can say or do whatever the heck you want. It could. I remember we had an album of humpback whales singing. That was one of the songs somebody used to play on a really crazy radio show. I remember driving to the station thinking the transmitter is blowing up. It was a whoop, 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 whoop. I'm like, oh my God, the pentode final is blowing up on the station. And that was kind of some of the weird, crazy stuff we did. But a whole lot less opportunity to explore new stuff. A lot harder to get in because, think about it, top 40 radios was the main thing. And jukeboxes could only hold about, I think, 40 or 50 records. So there was 50 songs or 40 songs every week that got played, and that was all there was room for. So if you were an up-and-coming artist and you may have the best song since sliced bread, you didn't instantly get in the top 40 because you were making space for Elton John or the Rolling Stones or the Beatles or some Motown song or whatever else. It was very crowded and very hard to break. And I can't tell you how many times that people used to call me when I was a music director at a couple of big radio stations, and they'd say, hey, we're a band, we got a great record, we'd love to come by and play it for it. And I'd say, fine, come in. And they'd play it for me. And indeed, it was a great song, but I couldn't play it because of that tight playlist that was what Top 40 was back then. If it wasn't charting on Billboard, and they'd be saying, how do we get the opportunity to chart if nobody will play our song in the first place? It's a catch-22. And I'd always say, hey, being talented and good at what you do musically is a prerequisite. Everything else, you can pretty much chalk it up to plain old luck. If you're in the right place at the right time with the right song, then you can make it. And somebody might say, well, how come Disco Duck by Rick Dees was such a big hit? How did he get his break? Well, he was a DJ at a big radio station. Or C.W. McCall and Convoy, the CB craze back in the day. Again, maybe the first social media that was out there. It did because it was a timely thing. Or Ray Stevenson, The Streak. Believe it or not, streaking was a big thing in the 70s where people would just strip down and run through crowds of people. And that was, you think back on it, what the heck were they smoking? But it was just, stuff that people were doing. And I think with social media the way it is today, it's possible to build a song around a social media meme or something like that.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately about the lost art of the album, right? And I think
Yeah.
this has been a problem for a while because I'm probably in the minority. In fact, I know I am just based on a lot of the data that I see and the reports that I see that a lot of people don't listen to albums anymore from top to bottom, and that to me that's sad because I love listening to an album top to bottom. I'm not a huge playlist guy. I don't want to knock anybody. If you love playlists, that's fine. And I certainly, at work sometimes I'll throw on a music playlist. But when I listen to music, I primarily, and mostly because I'm still very much an analog person, that I love putting on a record on my turntable and just sitting through the entire experience. I don't like doing the dishes and doing other stuff and being distracted. I really like to be completely immersed in the music. So I'm probably in the minority there, but I do feel like, why are people making albums anymore? Because it seems like a lot of
Because
people certainly
aren't.
don't like to listen to it anymore.
No, it's a good point. People aren't buying albums anymore. They're buying single songs. And back in the day, when groups like Pink Floyd created an album, it was meant to be listened from front to back. Even the Beatles were doing the same thing. It was a work of art in its entirety. So the singles that came off them were, supposed to stand on their own. But people aren't buying album work anymore. They're buying singles, and they're picking what they want to hear. So there may be a new album out by a certain artist, Taylor Swift, and there may be a hit song on that album or one of the hit songs they release on it. Maybe 4 or 5 songs are charting songs on an album, and they just buy them as they get released by the record companies. There was a lot of control over how that worked, that whole process of pulling songs from, like you think about Stevie Wonder and Inner Visions or Songs in the Key of Life. There was a giant chunk of songs on there. Again, an art piece in itself, if you listen to the whole album, but individual songs that came off them, Superstition, Songs in the Key of Life. I mean, all kinds of great music was played that way. It was a methodology that people had of how they listened to issues. People, I don't think listen to albums now. They listen to a playlist, as you were saying, Alex, that might consist of a handful of songs from their favorite artists. But the weird thing that's missing from curated playlists that radio stations do today is that they're making decisions based on lots of research that's done to determine what are the top 200 songs, let's say, for example.
Right.
They've been tested. There's research that's been done, and the cream comes to the top. If you load it up with a lot of B-sides and obscure songs, just because they're artistically interesting or you're trying to expose people to new music, you're taking away from the opportunity for somebody to hear one of the more in-demand songs. And that was part of it still is, part of the process that radio stations get rated on is the average quarter hour that people listen to a station is based on you staying on that station for more than 15 minutes at a time. So your idea of a playlist or a radio station's idea is to keep playing the most familiar, most hit-worthy songs in a row so that we hold on to that person for longer and longer periods of time. It's a numbers game. It sometimes has nothing to do with the art form. It has everything to do with the mechanics and the methodology of the way the ratings services work. It's very interesting.
That's a good point. And, I just want to shout out to Shoji Productions there. I think that's Robert there. I was asking us a question. What's the latest album you've acquired? For me, and again, not a new band, but I still buy lots of music, lots of new music, but it's new music from artists that have been making music for 30 plus years. Like I just bought Bruce Dickinson, who's the singer for Iron Maiden. He's been, doing a solo project since the early 90s. I just bought his new album, The Mandrake Project, which is fantastic. So I'm really enjoying that. Also, Judas Priest put out a new album. That's a fantastic album. I'm listening again. But again, these are artists that are well entrenched, who have massive catalogs, have been around since the 70s or 80s. So I'm not really seeking out a whole lot of brand new bands that are just up and coming now. So that is the problem. That's the challenge that I have, is finding these artists.
You play to your comfort level. I mean, if you're comfortable with those bands, Judas Priest is a very narrow niche of hard metal music, and there's not a lot of other artists. I mean, AC/DC, are they touring anymore? I don't think so. So you're going to have to explore their older stuff, and yet it keeps showing up. It shows up in the social zeitgeist of movie soundtracks. You know, which hard driving rock and roll or Marvel movie doesn't have at least one AC/DC song in it?
Yeah.
It's just sort of cool to do that. So you get kind of exposed to some of the artists you kind of grew up with. Another thing is that I'm a big fan of Steely Dan. I love their artistry, their musicianship. Truly, other than Donald and oh gosh, I keep forgetting everybody's name. Sorry, it's COVID. It's mostly studio musicians. Might be Toto or Boss Skaggs or some of those guys that are all session musicians. I love the remastered stuff. I like the stuff where they go in and remastered them, so they're slightly different or a little cleaner, a little bit better, where they had time to do stuff on the songs that they didn't do when they were pushed in a dark recording studio back in the 70s or 80s, trying to get this stuff out. They've had chances to do it. The other thing of the economics that are being played out here is if you're a current artist that's charting on radio stations all over the country or in social media or on whatever, Pandora or Spotify or whatever, Apple Music, you can't really make music anymore from selling your songs. You can make a little bit of music here and there, but where you're making your music is when you go on tour. So now the whole gymnastics that you have to go through in order to make ends meet is based around going on tour. It's a very expensive proposition. And if you bought a ticket lately, you know how expensive it is to get a ticket to a big show.
I think as far as the industry is concerned, I think artists have made the bulk of their money from, at least in the last 20 years, probably from concert sales, from merchandise. I think album sales, I don't have any proof because I haven't looked at the data recently, but I imagine actual physical media sales have not been really that relevant in several decades, right? Because even CDs started going away with the invention of Napster, right? With the invention of, it goes back to the start of streaming services, right? So I think they haven't been relevant in a while. But of course, these tours are also very expensive. I acknowledge that. To tour all over the world, to have a crew, to pay salaries, to have insurance, to do all this stuff. Is there any wonder why tickets are $150, $200, $250, $300? Is there any wonder why it's so expensive?
Yeah, because the record companies have screwed over their musicians for so long, they have to find other ways to make up the losses. You know, back in the day, when the record companies were paying their musicians, there were all kinds of sneaky ways that they would find ways to short the payback to the artists. They would write it off as promotional expense, which might be everything from buying billboards to ads in music magazines. Perhaps even paying off somebody here and there. We won't go into that in great detail. By the way, I never took money. Didn't have to. But anyhow, it was very complicated back in those days. The thing that I really kind of hated about we'll call it the peak of the music industry, we'll say 70s and 80s, for example, as two genres, two timetables, was that a typical album would sell, whether it was on a CD or on vinyl, for around $25. Does that sound about right? About $20, somewhere in that neck of the woods. And I never could figure out why a DVD would sell for more like $12. And it would be about a movie that they said they'd say, well, we spent $30 million doing this movie. And that's that's a low figure for today's motion picture budgets. So they'd say, well, we spent $30 million to do this, so we're going to charge you $10 for a DVD. How come the music and the record companies could charge $15 or $20 for a music CD? Where was that money going? And I think that's part of what drove things like Napster and the
100%.
record companies, for people to fight back. I think it became cool to find ways to stick it to the record companies when they could.
100%.
I'm just saying.
And I've heard people that have worked for record companies that have talked about what the actual costs are to manufacture a CD, and it makes you wonder why are you marking them up, especially during a period where physical media sales are struggling, right? Why are you marking up these discs to $18 to $20? I mean, it's crazy. Especially, you're absolutely right. Especially when physical media sales were not doing well, it doesn't make sense. Now, I think vinyl records are a little bit of a different story, because vinyl records now, I believe last year, as of 2023, finally surpassed CD sales. So it's still a niche. It's still a tiny percentage, but vinyl sales are actually quite healthy right now. But I've talked to people that are in some bands that have attempted or have made or put out content on vinyl, like this one that I have. I talked about this a few minutes ago. This is Bruce Dickinson's new album on vinyl, which is a beautifully packaged. You can sort of see that the cover's embossed, right?
It's embossed, yeah,
right?
beautiful.
So this is the Mandrake project, and it's just beautiful artwork and photography on the inside. There's some nice black and white photography. I just love opening this. This is what they call a gatefold, and on the back, you got all the track listings there. I'll try to get this in focus over here.
Show us the vinyl if you can too.
And then
Sometimes
this is a double
colored
L.
vinyl.
This is a double LP, and you got lyrics for all the songs in here. There's a photo of Bruce on the back, right? And I'll pull out the other one too. So I love reading the liner notes. And you see like all the massive list of people that it takes to actually put together an album like this. Everything from the mix engineers to the assistants to the producers, the mastering engineers, the techs that tune the instruments, all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of people involved, and it's really cool to see all the names. This is just, this is not I was checking to see if this was a colored vinyl, but this is just a regular black vinyl. You got the gold medallion there on the front, but
yeah, that's nicely done.
It's cool, but these are not cheap. I mean, I think this cost in Canadian dollars, a double LP cost me $60. That's expensive.
Well, it's a limited run. In all fairness to the people that are putting
But
that out,
it's a lot of paper and plastic and vinyl.
It's a limited run. A lot of printing costs there. Probably
Right.
the printing cost to create that album exceed the vinyl pressing, because all the vinyl is it's a little round goop of vinyl plastic that they stick on a tabletop, and the stamper comes down, stamps it, and then trims it. And that's it. That's the extent of creating the actual album.
Right.
But vinyl has its own following. Some people say it's better than CDs. I mean, we could go into a whole show about the quality differences. I think vinyl is just a listening experience, and I'll give anybody that versus a CD, which is a completely different technical way with dots and dashes or positives and negatives or whatever you want to call them for a digital readout. But the whole album experience is no longer quite what it is. Now, granted, you can say, well, they may have a CD and it may not have such an extensive liner notes, and because you can only fit so much on a 5-inch CD or whatever. But you can also go on the internet and maybe go to a website, and then you can see everything, and it becomes a whole multimedia experience where you might see concert videos and things like that. But I'm with you. I think vinyl is interesting. It's a little bit of an anachronism, but it's interesting to see how that goes. And I'm just taking a peek at some of the comments that are coming in. Yeah, right, Steve. Edison cylinders, maybe the truly first digital recordings out there. Little pings playing notes on it. By the way, I'm selling my old music box. It's digital. It's not analog. But anyhow, a lot of different pros and cons across the board about where you get it and your exposure to it. And before I'm going to go out and spend $60 on a vinyl album, I'm going to want to know a lot about that album. Like, for example, I don't know the artist that you're showing us, Alexander, but I'm sure going to look into it, because if you like it, I should like it. And you're an influencer. Tell us why we should buy that. What's cool about that artist? There it is.
Well, why should people buy it? Yeah, it's, again, music. This is the thing. Music is so subjective. But if you're a big Iron Maiden fan, you know who Bruce Dickinson is. He's got a very distinct voice. Of course, because of copyright, I can't play anything. But I've followed his solo career ever since the first album he put out in the early 90s. I think it was, 91, 92? Just after he left Iron Maiden, and he put out Tattooed Millionaire. The cool thing about his solo career, if you follow it, is that the style of music that he does, which is, very much heavy metal, but also has lots of rock influences. That first Tattooed Millionaire solo album was very much a 70s rock album. It had that 70s tone to it. And then the later albums started going back towards heavy metal, and actually a much more modern sounding heavy metal than Iron Maiden. So he started exploring more modern sounds, started, exploring lower tuned guitars, that kind of stuff with Balls to Picasso. And then my two favorite albums, Accident of Birth, Chemical Wedding, absolute masterpieces of an album if you're into heavy metal. Incredible songwriting. There's not a single bad track on either of those albums. This album...
What's happening to Rush these days?
It's a good question.
Not Limbaugh, the group. I mean, it's from they're from Canada. I mean, they were brilliant.
They are. I mean, I think they're still. I don't know if they're touring now because obviously Neil Peart, the drummer, is gone now. But I don't know if they're continuing now or what with what's happening. I know people have been a little critical of Geddy Lee's voice not being able to hit all the notes anymore. It's like, look, these guys have been around a long time. There's lots of artists in their 70s now that just their voices aren't the same anymore. And I understand it's a little bit disappointing. You want your heroes to always sound the same, but the reality is your vocal cords are muscle. Your voice changes over time. My voice is not the same that it was 10 years ago. 20 years from now, my voice is not going to be the same that it is today. That's just a reality. And, if you go to a concert and you expect your heroes to sound exactly like they sounded 40 years ago, I'm sorry to say you're going to be disappointed. Maybe you should just be happy with how those albums sound and just listen to those albums. Don't go to the actual concert, right? But, I still have a good time at these shows. The last time I saw Judas Priest a number of years ago, they sounded fantastic. I saw Iron Maiden actually recently when they came to Vancouver last year in October. They sounded fantastic. So those guys are still sounding great. Bruce sounds great. So I have no complaints for some of the bands that I've been listening to. Hey, Mitch, when was the last time you went to a concert?
Oh, I hated concerts. In fact, I was when I was music director, I used to be backstage. That was the only place for me. I couldn't go into the crowd, the mosh pits, the crazy. My sister went to a concert with my mom. It was an Earth, Wind, and Fire concert, and they were passing a doobie in the row, and my mom gets the doobie, and she's like, at the time when she was in her 80s, she's like, "What do I do?" I said, "Well, smoke it or pass it on." It's a different experience to go to a concert, that especially if it's general admittance. It's crazy. It's crazy out there. I do want to make an observation of something that we talked about here on the show with some people that are in the know. We have suggested as part of the rebirth of radio could be talking about the music. And even if it's the classic hits, there's a lot of stories to be told, a lot of information. And in so doing, you're promoting the artists, the groups. Everybody experiences music their own way, as you said. It's subjective, but it also might be quantitative. If you're going for somebody that knows to play a blues riff a certain way, that's like David Gilmour playing, or Jimmy Page doing something. And people get so hung up. If you go on on YouTube, you can see, well, look how he's playing those notes. It's brilliant. Look at Jimi Hendrix, how he's playing with a left hand and he's doing this. I mean, that's cool and exciting if you're a guitarist.
Sure, which
I'm just a consumer. I don't know the first thing about playing an instrument, but I can get into that. If somebody could tell us, trivia about what it took to record something, mistakes are being made. What was I saw on YouTube? Out of the blue, Criss Cross had the song "Sailing." You know, the one that starts with the violins. It starts very slowly with just violins playing. That was a mistake. He was saying that he had two tape machines,
Right.
one with a guitar lead on it and the other with the strings on it, and they fired them both off against the multitrack, and one of the decks didn't roll, so the only thing they had was the strings. So it has that listen to the song Sailing. I'm not going to sing it for you, but go check it out on YouTube. The opening, they just said, hey, that's a happy accident. Let's just keep it. So all those stories that people could tell about the way songs got made and the happy accidents of the guest appearance of a certain artist that stepped in and played on it. There's a lot of interest in that. I think that might be a very interesting thing for radio to go to, is to have people knowledgeable about the music. So if we're going to rehash classic hits, let's talk about the artist involved.
Mitch, and you don't have to give me an answer now. Just think about this, because I also want to talk about audio quality with music. But think about a time, because I want to hear about a story where you had a really bad experience back on the radio station that you worked at with a band or any kind of celebrity that came in. Think about a story where somebody, maybe they were just a difficult interview. I'm sure you were on the radio for so long. I want to hear about some of those awful experiences, because everybody has them, right? But I want to talk about.
I could tell you.
Okay, well,
one
if
or
you got
two.
one right now, let's hear it.
Yeah, sure, why not? I mean, and I think Joel Denver touched on it. I was working at WFIL with Joel Denver back in the day. WFIL was a very powerful, listened to radio station in Philadelphia. And Joel at the time was the music director, and then I took over the job from him. And we were having a conversation about the way Hall & Oates, who were just, Sarah Smiles was the song that was released at that time. And they said something that was very derogatory towards our radio station and the way we did things. And basically we decided, you don't mess with the hand that feeds you, come on. And we kind of ostracized him or pulled the record from the rotation just to show them we do have the power to make or break things. I don't know. I don't remember all the circumstances. I'll leave that to Joel to say. But I do remember that later on, I wanted to go to a concert at the Tower Theater where Hall & Oates were performing, and I didn't know that some of this other stuff was going on in the background. And I asked the record promoter, I said, hey, I'd like to go backstage and talk to the guys after, because I love Blue Eyed Soul. I like the way they do their music. And I was standing right outside of the dressing room getting ready to walk in. They said, WFIL? No way. We're not talking to him. Tell him to get the hell out of here. And I'm like, what? Why would they do that? I mean, those are just some of the stories that happen. And then there was a funny story. It was the 25th anniversary for Electric Factory Concerts. Larry Magid was the head of the company. They used to take the Spectrum, which was a big convention center in Philadelphia where the Sixers and the Flyers played. And they did concerts there. It was a horrible concert venue, by the way, just really bad audio. But anyhow, I went to a party at one of the hotels, and it was a party to meet up with Kiss, who was the lead at the show. The problem was the Kiss was not in uniform. So I was hanging at the bar. I didn't realize I was sitting there having drinks and chatting up radio with Gene Simmons. And afterwards, when I saw him backstage at the concert, he was in. This is like when they were really serious about their outfits. Afterwards, he was like, "How you doing, Mitch?" And I'm like, "What? What?" And I'm like, I just kind of looked at him and I said, "Oh, you're the guy at the bar at the Hilton." And then it's like he's, shh, they don't want to talk about it. I said, "That's quite a thing for you." And no, he didn't stick his tongue out for me. He really hates that, by the way.
Yeah,
so, there's plenty of fun stories like that.
It's
I
interesting.
could probably think on it.
I've heard from, because I know Gene Simmons comes across as obviously a very much a personality, but I've heard from a lot of people that have actually toured with him and said that he's a sweetheart. So it's like you can't always believe the stories, right? Because I think there's the rock and roll character Gene Simmons, then there's probably the person, the individual Gene Simmons. And so, obviously, I think he's playing a heightened version of himself, and I think he likes the camera. It's very clear he likes the camera, and I think there's a bit of a performance there, but he's probably not exactly
That's
like.
That's what Kiss was all
totally,
about.
Absolutely.
They were a shtick band, and they played it very well. Another story, when I was in San Antonio, Texas, as music director at a station, and Alice Cooper was coming through with one of his spider-themed concerts or whatever the heck. And the record promoter said, hey, would you like to have a little chit-chat or dinner with Alice? And I'm like, yeah, I really would like to do that, but let's just do something different. I hear he likes to play golf. And I belong to this golf course there called Turtle Creek. And I invited, it was just me and Alice, not even the record guy, just me and Alice playing golf at Turtle Creek Country Club. And we had more fun. By the way, Alice is a spot-on, brilliant golfer.
I hear that.
He takes it very, very seriously.
I'm jealous.
But
you
we
played
connected
golf
more.
That's
Alice
amazing.
Cooper. I mean, and it was like always like, is this the real Alice Cooper or is it the personality on stage? And no, of course not. He's an exaggerated persona, and I tried to be myself.
He comes across as a very smart guy. I like him as a person.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. Yeah, see, Alice is definitely still plays golf. He's still quite good at it. So meeting these people, the one thing that I really hated, to go into these back end stories, and thanks for bringing it up, was that many times, including We Are the World and other Farm Aid and whatever the other concerts that were being done in Philadelphia, the thing that I really hated were the hangers-on and people that would circle and feed off of artists. And I don't think they liked it. I think they put up with it as a necessity. But I would never, ever, ever, and I mean that seriously, fall into that circle, that crowd. I was always the guy sitting in the corner somewhere. And I never forget that, who the heck was it? I think it was Steve Miller. I was sitting in the corner at one of his after parties or whatever. And he came over and, it was Bob Seger. My apologies. Bob Seger. And I was just sitting in the corner having a beer and sitting there. And Bob came over and sat down, and we had a nice chat. But those people started coming over to us, and I was like, no, keep them away. It's just that whole thing, the hangers-on, the sycophants, the people. They want all of them, scared him to death. John Lennon, even before shit happened with him, it was his Helping Hand Marathon he was doing in Philadelphia, and he was very concerned about going into public. He said very specifically, I'm afraid of crowds of people because I'm afraid somebody's going to do me some damage. He truly had a premonition for that. And then when it happened, it was such a sad story. All of that stuff, that bullshit in the record industry, really turned me off. And that's one of the reasons, to answer your original question, I wasn't really much into the concerts. The famous concert with Kiss, we were on stage with the opening act. It was Bob Seger, and he was doing the opening act, and the people in the Spectrum in Philadelphia were being very bad, yelling Kiss while he was up there performing. Bob Seger, with all due respect to Gene Simmons and the rest of the gang at Kiss, Bob Seger, he's just a brilliant artist, and he could write his waves in circles around what Kiss was doing at the time. But Philadelphia treated him very poorly. And after people were throwing like fireworks on the stage and pennies and quarters, and it was just crap. So after the concert was over, or maybe while it was finishing up, Kiss was playing, and I went backstage, and that's where I was sitting in the corner, and I peeked in one of the side rooms trying to snag a beer or something, and the manager was in the process of raising his voice, talking to Seger and his band. And I just sort of stepped in. I was like, instantly everybody turned around and looked at me. And I said, look, I just want to say something on behalf of everybody in Philadelphia. Not everybody feels the same way about you guys. So it was a bad venue for you to be booked alongside Kiss in this kind of a crowd under these circumstances. And I want you to know that you're loved by this town. We respect the music that you play, and I'll play any one of your songs anytime you want, whenever you want. And that was just that. I just got my 2 cents in, turned around, and walked out of the room. I don't know how they felt about it. Maybe they thought I was full of shit, but that's the kind of stuff that I hate about the stuff that goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Sorry, you asked the question?
The thing about I just one question about the John Lennon thing, because I've heard that story. I've heard him say that, but I wonder why he had that concern about somebody trying to harm him, because lots of celebrities, they don't really talk about that. I mean, maybe they're concerned only because they have no private life and people are coming up to them asking for autographs, but you don't really hear celebrities saying they're afraid that someone's going to kill them in public. I wonder why he had. I know he had said some controversial things, perhaps.
That's
in the
reason, because
past,
John
but-
just didn't care. He didn't care.
Right.
He didn't care what people thought of him. He would say it. He would say, our band is more popular than Jesus, and he walked it back later. But probably was true at the time. For many, I'm not buying Jesus' latest record, but with all respect to our religious friends. But anyhow, he would say things like that, and it would just be so outrageous. But he could say it, and he did, and he had no filter for it. I'm sure some other groups are a lot more careful about what they do and say, particularly in this world of social media. You got to be so bloody careful. But that's probably why he was worried. He's worried about the consequences of being honest. Essentially, that's what it came down to.
Yeah. What about audio quality? So going back to music, because that's one of the things you wanted to talk about, Mitch, was audio quality. And I've had some experience with this at a radio station, the one on campus at the school that I was at. But I don't know how other radio stations operate now, but we were operating off of MP3s, which just, I was stunned that the music we were playing. Now, keep in mind, remember, radio is already, because it's broadcast over the air, is already having to compress and limit everything that's going out, over the air. And now we're playing compressed music that is lower quality. Do radio stations not have
let's step back.
Okay.
Let's step back to how that all happened. I mean, we
Please.
were playing vinyl for ages, and probably through the 70s and through the 80s. And then CDs came out late 80s into the 90s, and there was a big deal about playing CDs live on the air. In fact, some stations started calling them CD 105. They were playing CDs. And the only thing that sounded different was that they didn't skip. Well, they could skip, but they didn't skip as much as the LPs and 45s that they were playing on the air. It was a pretty good transition to be playing. Now, the next step after playing CDs on the air would be going to automation systems, which were basically computer-based playout devices. And some of the earlier players back in the day would be Audio Vault from Broadcast Electronics, one of the first that was out there, Scott Studios. Basically, the automation systems back then, which are being used today, by the way, were essentially database systems that would be databases built around individual song files and information about those song files. So you would associate a file, which would be the song, with a database entry, which would be the song, the intro, the outro, the length of it, maybe some album art, maybe some P code and things like that relate to the record companies. And in the beginning, storage space was costly, and the first compressed format, we'll say an audio compressed or a lossy recording that was being used on radio, would be the MPEG-2. They might have done a little bit of MPEG-1, layer 1, but MPEG layer 2 was the format, because they had to compress because of the amount of space that they were dealing with. Because remember, a 2 gigabyte drive might be $1,000 back in the day. So they had to compress the file size in order to make room for all of the songs. And the quality that was being given up with any lossy format, MPEG-2 had horrible frequency response on the high end. But here's the weird thing about all those lossy formats. And I'll say MPEG layer 1, layer 2, MPEG-3, AAC plus, all of those codecs, are that people got so used to them that they didn't hear the problems associated with those lossy formats. Is that you sort of got used to hearing how a cymbal would sound on a vinyl disc versus on a CD player with a bad DAC on it versus MP3. the clipping and the distortion and the stuff would be something that people just didn't hear it. So all they were concerned about was the convenience of having lots of storage space to be able to compress these songs and put them on there. And by the time it got squeezed, compressed, and processed and thrown out through the airwaves on an analog broadcast, and with a very low dynamic range, because that's the way radio worked, that was the given standard. And then, of course, along comes Napster as a way to share files, because you didn't have that super download time with a linear WAV file. So Napster became the thing, and people began to accept the MP3 as the de facto standard for storage of their songs, mainly because that was the shareable format that was relatively good, I guess, in a way. I mean, I could hear all the weird stuff going on, and I kind of gritted my teeth and put up with it for the convenience cycle. And when the iPad or iPod came out, that sort of cemented that relationship. And when Steve Jobs had the deal where you could buy the individual songs from Apple at 99 cents, and they cut the price there. They were all MP3s back then.
That was a big deal.
Because it was a big deal because it made it convenient. And it turns out that people would rather pay $1 for a song that they liked than to steal it on Napster and not be concerned about the quality of the person that ripped that song. In other words, the process of taking a linear WAV file from a CD and placing it in a lossy format like MP3 or one of the other formats I mentioned, some of them are better than others. And some people would do things to them that would be the bit rate would be too low, and you started putting AAC, Stephen Stryker says, or AAC plus. All of them had trade-offs. But what won out during that whole period and transition was the convenience of having all of that available on small hard drives. And for radio stations, they didn't have to go out and spend, many, many thousands of dollars to have a nonlinear, clear, clean, quality WAV file. Now, here's the thing, and here's where the big switcheroo starts to happen, is now there's absolutely no reason why you should be listening to any kind of a compressed file. I mean, talking about a lossy codec, because hard drives are cheap. You can go to Best Buy for $200. You can have a 10 or 20 gigabyte or maybe even a terabyte drive that can hold your entire music library. I have an SD card holding my entire music library, which is 10,000 songs in the back of this thing. They're WAV files. They're 16-bit because that's the way they started out on a CD. And I have a decent DAC. So I guess the moral of the story here is we went through a phase through the 90s, I'll say, and maybe the early 2000s, that people would put up with the quality of the sound files because it was good enough and it was convenient. And I love being able to walk around.
I think you and I, Mitch, we're in the minority, right?
Definitely.
Definitely. Because I mean, and I'm conflicted on this because, and you mentioned the app, the App Store and iTunes and this whole now training everybody to buy music for next to nothing. And as a consumer, 99 cents for song, I appreciated that. And that was very seductive. But as a musician, as somebody who creates and understands the value of music and how hard it is to do this stuff, I really felt like it was devaluing what we did, and it was training a whole generation to just think that, well, this stuff is easy to make, and really you shouldn't have to pay for it anyways. Music should be free, right? I mean, it's on Napster. I mean, it's illegal, but people were downloading stuff off of Kazaa and Napster illegally, but it just trained a whole generation of people to say, well, this music should just be available, which is horseshit as far as I'm concerned, because it's really hard to make an album. I mean, there are bands that spend 1 and 2 years, sometimes longer, writing this stuff, and top to bottom, it costs a lot of money to make this stuff. Now, of course, costs have dropped as technology makes it easier to do this stuff in your bedroom. I mean, just look at what Billie Eilish has been able to accomplish. But I don't really like it, and the same with the App Store. I mean, do you remember, Mitch, when you had to buy a piece of software, you would have to go into a store, buy a piece of boxed software, sometimes hundreds of dollars. It was expensive. And then Apple comes along with the App Store, and suddenly it's 99 cents. And they're pushing this whole thing on developers to make their apps 99 cents, which great for consumers. It's cheap, but also that app, doesn't recoup the ROI, right? It may have cost on average a company $200,000 to develop that application. Now suddenly you got to sell it for 99 cents. How many copies do you got to sell to recoup that? It's hard, right?
Well, the problem is that any purchase or rip from Napster was a finger in the eye of the record companies have been ripping off their favorite artist anyhow. It was sort of a counterculture thing. It was cool to do that. And I think that sort of bled into MP3s being popular because, again, they was sort of the Napster culture that was being involved. And then Napster went away eventually, as they should. I think Roxio might own them now. But people got used to that kind of quality, and not as much attention to detail was being put into creating songs at that point because the value of the songs had dropped so far. If their song is only worth 99 cents, where it used to be part of a album compilation that you could sell for 20, 25 bucks, there was less of an incentive for artists to create those kinds of things. The other thing to keep in mind is that the record companies kind of, screwed the pooch on themselves, is that they killed the golden egg when they started fighting people for sharing songs either personally. They even went after cassettes back in the day, which would be a personal way of sharing something.
I remember that.
There's fair use rules, but cassettes were a bad, evil thing. But that's a whole different story. The point I'm trying to make is that the record companies became the bad guys. They got what they deserved in a lot of respects. But if they had come up with that whole Apple Music thing, or even before Napster, people probably would have embraced it. And if they had just fessed up to the fact,
100%.
well, here's your chance.
They were
now.
too late. They were way too late.
If they had played their cards right,
Yeah.
they could have done it. Do you know now when these record companies are suing people for streaming and doing, most of those record companies, they're not even locally, they're not owned in North America. They're foreign companies. They might be Japanese, they might be German. Well, God bless them all. But we're not talking about, it's not an American thing when you support your local record company, because there's very few locally sourced music anymore. But out of all of this conversation, and we're getting a lot of feedback on our chatters here. Thank you for doing that. This is obviously a very interesting subject. It lowered our expectations as far as quality goes, and for purists, and I'll say like Alexander, who's got a good set of ears, mine are older. I began to become very disturbed by it, and I went out of my way to look for alternative things to MP3, and all of them that came along from Fraunhofer Institute, who invented MP3, and then AAC, then AAC Plus, and all the other flavors that have come out since then. I could hear all this stuff, and I did my damnedest to explain to people and educate people what you're hearing. It's like people used to process the audio when they would rip a song off of a CD, which was okay. Not great, but okay. But what they were doing was aggravating the encoders that would create the stream or the MP3 file, and doing things that made it even harder for it to do this perceptual Fraunhofer stuff, magic, to the high frequency. So they were actually making it worse by processing, by clipping, and doing compressing, and when I mean compressing, I mean audio compression,
right,
and limiting things like that. It would cause issues, side effects, and they were poorly done. So it really was like the fingernails on the chalkboard for anybody that worked in a recording studio or sold musical instruments or audio gear, because a lot of the stuff that we would hear, and maybe some of our listeners and viewers do, you can teach yourself to hear it. Like distortion, for example, is a lot of times is a taught thing. You have to know what you're listening for in order to perceive distortion. The same is true for artifacts in MP3 files. If you love a piano or a violin or things that have overtones and harmonics, you're going to hear it instantly, particularly if you're an aficionado of those things. I had a local music director come in once to edit his performances. It was the orchestra, the full Delaware Orchestra. And he knows what he's, a conductor knows what he's listening to. And he would listen to my recording and say, "What's happening there with the violins?" I'd say, I don't know what to tell you. It's the way it's a 16-bit recording system and it's throwing some important information away. Okay. All right. And his ears were just so much better than mine, and mine are pretty good, or were good. So it's an interesting road that we travel. I think it's coming back. I think that because of the cost of storage, first of all, there's no reason to buy MP3 files, folks. Don't do it. Stay with linear PCM or WAV files, or there's other high quality storage. Alex, you probably could tell us some of those.
And Mitch, I don't want to sit here and just talk about all the things that annoy me or piss me off, because there's also good things.
It's the last angry DJ.
There are good things to talk about, and I'll get to the good stuff in a sec. But one thing that annoys me as somebody who works with sound and who does mixing is we have to now spend a lot more time checking to make sure that our mixes fold down properly in mono. Because now with the proliferation of these little pillbox, Bluetooth speakers that somebody has in their kitchen, it's just a mono speaker. And in fact, as somebody in my day job who rents PA equipment, the average person that comes in doesn't even understand the difference between stereo and mono. And I have to explain it to people. People will often ask me, "Oh yeah, I'm doing a party this weekend, small gathering in the birthday party in the back of my house. I just want to rent one speaker." I'm like, "Okay, are you sure you want one speaker? Do you know the difference between mono and stereo? It'll play back, but it'll be folded down in the mono." And they give me this glazed over look. And so in many ways, not just the bit rate like you're talking about, Mitch, not just the compression, the technology, but just the fact that people have now gone away from these hi-fi setups to just the sound bar or the crappy built-in speakers in their TV. So that annoys me. But I do want to say one thing. A company like Apple, they've been doing better, I find, in the streaming audio world, because in comparison to other platforms like Spotify, Apple's streaming platform absolutely sounds better. And in fact, now, if you have a decent DAC, you can actually stream much higher quality lossless audio through Apple's service. If you have a DAC that's capable of 24-bit 48 kilohertz, you can actually request from Apple higher quality streams. So there are good things that are happening, and I think it remains to be seen whether or not Dolby Atmos is the answer to this whole trend now with immersive sound. Is that the answer to better sound? I don't know. It's not really taking off, but all the it's expensive to do because now, but again, the record companies are now pushing the artists to go through their back catalog to have all of this stuff remixed, and it's happening now. And a lot of newer albums are being mixed in Atmos and being folded down. They're making binaural mixes too, but
it was crazy.
I'm not really super impressed with it.
When they introduced CDs, it was crazy. The record companies were like, I had all these vinyl records, as many people did, and now you can buy the catalog as a CD. So they were getting, dividends on stuff that people already bought. So they were reselling stuff, and that's happened a few times since CDs came out, because then you had that super sound, supersonic, the DVD based audio. There's been a couple of different formats that have been released that are high bit rate, or low bit rate, 1 bit DSD, I guess it is. There's a lot of stuff, and we're going down the rabbit hole about all this stuff. But I'm more interested in the perceptions and what it does to people, and how it's affected the broadcast industry. Today's radio station, it's you're hearing music being played by a computer. It's a playout system being played through a sound card, or in some cases a virtual sound card, going into an analog board, maybe even maybe not digital. Because remember, the FM signal for most stations is still analog. They do have the HD1, HD2, which are digital versions of it, but they're horrible sounding. I listen to satellite radio. I can't stand it. It just sounds processed and brittle to my hearing, but that's me. I mean, I may not be the average person. The average person may say, sounds fine in my car, but it doesn't have the presence and the sound. So there's lots of things not to like about it.
Yeah, and I think, Mitch, to summarize too, we're talking about a confluence of many things, I think, that have led to where we are now, to this degradation overall of what I would call the experience of music. So 20 years ago, starting with, these streaming services with Napster, with Kazaa, and then Apple releasing the iTunes store with these 99-cent songs, and its attention spans have lowered. People don't care about albums anymore. The overall listening experience has become, now it's music is in the background now. It's no longer a focal point for us. It's I'm doing the dishes, I'm doing the laundry. I'm not really paying attention to the music. So I feel like, why are we making music anymore if we don't really care about it? If we're listening to it on garbage speakers, if we're putting it on in the background so it's not even the focal point of our day, what are we doing here?
Well, it depends. It depends on the artist too. Some artists get involved, like Neil Young is famously involved in creating a compression or not so compressed music file system that apparently sounds great. I've never heard it before, but he makes a big point of taking it around. So, maybe they get active about it and start to educate people like we are right now. We're just saying, hey, folks, we're not advocating necessarily any of these things. We're just saying this is how it affects your listening habits. Like Alexander, you were hit the nail right on the head when you said it depends on what you're doing. I mean, if you're listening to radio, you're usually doing something else with it, like driving a car, fixing a meal, or doing your laundry, or doing your homework, or whatever it might be. It's not something that you sit down and you engage it like it's a motion picture or a lecture in a lecture hall. It's something that you just sort of do it with it. I just have a personal opinion, as Alex does, about the quality of it, and it's affected the business. Now, maybe this stuff going back to vinyl, I think there are radio stations now that are doing vinyl hours where they play vinyl direct onto the air. That's kind of cool. I mean, that's different. There's a whole bunch of reasons why vinyl sounds different than the digital file. It might actually not sound as accurate as the digital rendition, but it sounds different, and it may sound more musical to you. Things like that. It's like even an odd order harmonics and how that can be a good thing. Like your friend Rupert Neve that's behind you in your little statue behind you there, Alexander. He understood what those things, what transformers did for audio. It was musical. If there was distortion in there, it was musical distortion. It didn't sound bad. But anyhow, all of these things contribute to how much we like or dislike what's going on. The ultimate story here is the artist trying to break new trends in music. There haven't been major trends in music in terms of the artistry and the way it's performed, in my opinion, since groups like the Beatles came along, it revolutionized the way music was being produced and created. Not so much nowadays. Everybody's pretty much following the same dollar bill that's floating around. Again, my opinions expressed may not represent those here at the Last Angry DJ, but it's an opinion for what it's worth, and I'm not going to hold back. So I think it's a great conversation that we've had here about that, and in fact how MP3 files and the availability of music has affected how we get exposed to it as an art form, which is really what we're talking about here, and how that's going to happen to change moving down the line. And radio's still stuck with the same technology that it used pretty much 100 years ago to send the signal out over the airwaves. It's a distribution method that's really being discussed here. But it has a chance right now to break out and be something completely different. It doesn't have the same lockups that social media has. It has a chance to be different. Instead, it's trying to be the same thing. and it's using 80s technology and methodology to broadcast something that people don't want anymore. So that's the problem with broadcasting today, is that people, it hasn't evolved with the times. It needs to evolve. It needs to be something new.
Yeah, and we'll
Anything
be
else you want to cap this off with our conversation about music and how it's affecting?
Yeah, I think it was a great conversation. We'll be talking more about that. And you're right. You're saying the industry has to evolve, and the whole world is evolving. I mean, we're seeing these changes all the time, and that's why this show exists, because we got to talk about this stuff, because we got to stay on top of it. It's really interesting, and it remains to be seen. I'm somewhat optimistic, but also as far as terrestrial radio specifically is concerned, I'm nervous about what's happening to that industry right now. But we'll see as time goes on, as we bring on other guests on this show, what they think. People that are on the front lines. It'd be interesting to see what some younger people are saying, who are just starting their careers in the industry. I just want to. I can't list. I'll try to remember everybody's names, but everybody who joined us today on the chat. Thank you very much. Jerry Hoyle, Hershey Trivedi, Shoji Productions, Mark Giuliani is there, Steven Stryker's there, Ernesto's there. Hopefully I'm not forgetting anyone, but there's too many people to listen. Of course, to everybody else on all our other platforms, if you're just tuning in, or if you don't know anything about the show, this is The Last Angry DJ, where we talk about the world of broadcast with Mitchell K.C. Hill here, who has a lot of experience in the industry, who was famously on WAMS. There's his lower third there, Mitchell K.C. Hill. And it was a great conversation today. And this is the first day that we're working out some issues, because we've only streamed to YouTube in the past, but now today we're on X, which is really cool. There's a huge chunk of you that are coming from that platform, and all the other ones, Twitch, LinkedIn, and I think that's everything. YouTube, of course, as well. So thanks very much to everybody there. And of course, if you want to join our community, carry on this great conversation after we're done, if you scan the QR code that is over my left shoulder here, that will invite you into our Discord communities. So we would love to see you there. Please do join us. I'll leave it up on the screen for a moment here, even after Mitch is signing off here, so you can get a chance to get in there. Of course, you can follow us on social media at The Last Angry DJ on X, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook as well. We'd love to see some more people on Facebook, so please join us there as well. Follow the page, and that way we can live stream to there, because we need about 80 more people. So please do that. You can write to us by email if you go to thelastangrydj.com/contact. And you'll see our email form there. And that's about all I have for housekeeping. Of course, if you want to support the show, patreon.com/thelastangrydj. You can throw us a couple of dollars for a cup of coffee every month. That would be much appreciated. And we appreciate every one of you.
Absolutely. And thank you, Alexander. That's a great summation. Yes, we do beg for the subscribe and the like. It's the only way that we can tell immediately back from you whether or not you like what we're doing. And a lot of the social media that we need to cooperate with, and by the way, we don't get paid to do this, require that we have a certain level of sponsors. Who is it that wants at least 100 followers before they'll let us stream on there? Is that Facebook?
That's Facebook. Yep.
Okay, so there's a lot of requirements that we have to meet. So please take a moment, hit that like, hit that subscribe. That helps us out. And I thought today was a very interesting conversation. Some of the best conversations we have is without a guest. Doesn't mean we don't want to have a guest. It's just once in a while, Alex and I get all this stuff built up and we have to get it out there. And that's what The Last Angry DJ is all about. So we have opinions, and you do too, and we need to hear them. And that's what the chat's all about. So once again, thank you for another great show. I think we did a fine coverage of something that's taken decades to happen, and we only took an hour and 16 minutes to explain what happened. What happened to radio? What happened to music? What happened to albums? All those things. So thanks for being here for show number 24. We look forward to seeing you again next week. We'll have another interesting guest to come on the show. If not, just be me and Alex talking about the industry and all the things that maybe you haven't thought about, but maybe we got you thinking now. So reach out. Tell us what you think. In the meantime, take care of yourselves. We'll see you next time.